responsibility for turning a blind eye to Beijing's interference despite receiving multiple warnings and being briefed on multiple occasions. This is part of a pattern of a complete lack of transparency from the time that revelations of Beijing's interference first came to light last.
The rapporteur, Mr. Johnston, that was doing his report, you've had some frustrations. I want you to elaborate on those. Am I correct in stating that whenever you met with him, he had advised you that the report was already written and had been being sent to translation? So when you talk about the negligence, or you didn't get interviewed by Mr. Rosenberg at all, and then when you did by Mr. Johnston, it was just as bad where it was already shipped off. Can you elaborate on that, of what happened in that circumstance and whether that was inappropriate or not?
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. And I did feel like it was window dressing. The very fact that the first investigation into the election didn't talk to the people that had raised issues about the election, I would give that an F if I was a professor, or it wouldn't survive in the private sector, that type of approach. Leave aside that Mr. Rosenberg had the Trudeau Foundation connections. I haven't focused on that, but I raised those in the House in 2018, 2019. Very inappropriate choice. Mr. Johnston, the Right Honourable David Johnston, a Canadian I have profound respect for, it really disappointed me, and I have great respect for Ms. Block as well, one of the country's finest litigators. The very fact that the draft of their report was at translation, and late in the meeting they acknowledged that to me, was profoundly disappointing. It was like I was a checkbox on a list, and I provided them and knew more information than they did. And in intelligence, not every fact is right. It is about assessing gray, but you can also give a curated view of intelligence to drive to an outcome. Who provided that curation to Mr. Johnston?
Can I elaborate a bit further on that? You'd mentioned you provided a bunch of new evidence and information. Mr. Johnston didn't then go and say that he didn't change any aspect of his report. He did not come back to you afterwards and say, thank you, this did help change the conclusions or anything that was included in his final report.
He told me my contributions were appreciated. As I said, I do think in his way he felt he was doing what was best for the country in his view. But when you're also receiving a very curated view, and when I read his report that all opposition leaders urged him for an inquiry, like, why no inquiry? What is there really to fear with sunshine and bright lights? And so just having spoken to him and seen how, in legal terms, you'd say closed mind by the time they were talking to me, it was very disappointing, given the fact that I now know that I was targeted and that our intelligence agencies knew about that targeting of me, because I got my CSIS briefing after my time with Mr. Johnston.
And I would just say the fact that he resigned afterwards and what the outcome was, I think, kind of speaks volumes to the integrity or the conclusion of the report and the quality of the report on that. If I could, Mr. O'Toole, I wanted to ask you just to build on something that was just said earlier. You and your family were targeted, or threats were made against you, and it was only after the leak and the reports came out that you were a target, you were provided the appropriate briefings and backgrounder on it. You'd mentioned that you said, I hope in the future that if a threat's made against you and your family, you would be made aware of this. I'd like to ask you, whenever you got the briefing after the fact, after it became public, and we've talked about the massive breakdown in communications failure and protocol failure here, whenever you got the briefing, were you given any assurances from the intelligence officials that in the event in the future a threat did come to you, that they would come to you directly and tell you? You said, I hope to, so I'm concerned that they didn't really give you that assurance that the same mistake wouldn't happen again?
I asked the CSIS officials. When I was briefed, they knew I was leaving. I knew I was leaving. My motion was my second last speech in the House of Commons, and so they knew this. I asked if I could seek support from them in the future if I had any concerns, and they were open to that. I did not get the sense that they would be required to brief me if an issue raised. And I remind you, the use of the word threat, if someone's being surveilled, that's not really a physical threat, but you're a target. And so the intelligence threat has been identified. And so I never feared for my life or my family. I want to make that very clear. But I do think if any individual parliamentarian is targeted, they need to be brought aware, and we should provide resources to help secure their communications and secure their home and their livelihood.
Prime Minister who has refused to take responsibility for turning a blind eye to Beijing's interference despite receiving multiple warnings and being briefed on multiple occasions. This is part of a pattern that's been forthcoming and honest in his conclusions with respect to feedback that he received.
I don't know Mr. Rosenberg. I appreciate his work for years for Canada. But you're right, Mr. Cooper, as a lawyer, as you are, that's very curious language he used in that report. And you can interview all the university professors and security experts and all the people that observed the election, or you can talk to the participants who were targeted in the election, and he failed to do so.